Hello, I am Cody Ellingham, and this is the Transformation of Value. Coming towards the end of the year is a time of reflection. What has come to pass and what is yet to be start to converge in these waning weeks of December with the advent of the cold of the Northern Hemisphere, of the emergence of summer in those southern islands. There is something about the cycle of time that seems to stand at odds with the well-worn, modern notion of linear progress. The years keep counting up, but each of them has the same seasons. Each of our lives has the same turnings. Though much of modernity is no longer pegged to the seasonality of food or weather like we once were, the broader rotary mechanisms of human society still stands out in the cycles of political and ideological thought. My first reading for you is a short poem that was only recently shared with me, but as I would come to find out, it was not the first time I had encountered it. It was as if I'd already felt its wake in the current of history. From the opening stanza, there is a sense that these words are as relevant today in 2024 as when it was written in the immediate aftermath of war and disease in 1919. Do you not sense that things are uneasy in the world? That there is a lingering instability with the seemingly constant desire from the blob or whoever it is to immanentize the eschaton, that is to say, to bring about the end and usher in the no place from which no man can return? There is a sense that the unassailable power of the status quo or the corrupt is here and now as it has always been. But in the end, everything has its season, somewhere between the ruminations of the tides and the turnings of the years. The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats, 1919. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming, hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man. A gaze blank and pitiless as the sun is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle, and what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. Our next story is something of my own. In contrast to Yeats's tension and allegory, I write about the kind of unending monotony that accompanies the machinery of law and the very words themselves that give power to the state and our reality. This is a personal story of a great man I once knew who stood in the image of Cicero, locked in the frozen tundra of law and the glacial flow of history. The King's Counsel by Cody Ellingham, 2024. Row upon row of English common law compendiums from 1932 through till 1954 sat on a long shelf in the dim meeting room in the tired office building on the corner of Featherston Street in Wellington, New Zealand. The dim room inherited an aroma of pigeon shit from the resident flock that inhabited the inaccessible crevices between our building and the next one over. The books were the property of Douglas Ewan, a defence lawyer who had run out of space in his tiny office on the first floor, and so the books became communal chattels in the meeting room that I also used from time to time. The 8-story building was about as old as the books. It was built in 1937, I think, and it had gone through several distinct epochs of interior renovations, while the Art Deco exterior had slowly crumbled. Wellington was well known for its earthquakes, and I think many of us still had our doubts about whether the place was really okay or not, but at least it was cheap and chirpy. The only original furnishings inside were the glass tiles on the stairwell, the steel balustrades, and the friable asbestos in the ceiling cavity. The building had all sorts of hidden nooks and crannies, and you could even get into the old basement of the restaurant on the ground floor through a labyrinth of secret shafts and switch rooms from the time when the building was the headquarters for the New Zealand Insurance Company before World War II. I had gotten to know Douglas Ewan after he had set up his office next to mine about a year after I had moved in. We had bumped into each other in the hallway as he came in, directing the cartage of heavy wooden furniture, Kiwi landscape paintings, and box upon box of law books. He was a strong character, with the deep, booming voice of a barrister, well tuned for the Cody timber wainscoting of the Supreme Court. I guess I had an admiration for his wisdom, and we soon struck up a friendship. His shtick was human rights law, but not in the LinkedIn posting, glamour-seeking way that it sometimes comes across today, but in the true sense of defending individuals from the heavy hand of the state's injustice. Doug had almost single-handedly helped repeal a couple of pieces of egregious legislation in New Zealand's legal system that had been set up by the decree of hot-headed politicians chasing votes, and he had done extensive free legal work for those most disadvantaged. It is perhaps common knowledge that it doesn't take too much to set the machinery of the state in motion to make a new law or to craft a new regulation, but it takes people like Doug years to unwind their bullshit. Indeed, it was the kind of tedium that leads one to chain smoking, drinking, and spending every night at the Avida wine bar across the road. In the evenings, I would often see Doug rushing downstairs on his way to Avida, bulging out of his suit with a silk tie blown across his shoulder by the turbulence off the harbour that turned Wellington's business district into a wind tunnel. I even joined him once or twice at Avida. The place was stuck in the eddy of a neoliberal time slip from what I can only imagine the year 1985 must have tasted like. It did not quite know what it wanted to be, halfway between a European bistro and a rundown sports bar. Doug and I shared a glass of Otago Merlot, and he seemed to know everybody there as he spoke with that deep, billowing laugh and exacting wit that I struggled to even follow, let alone keep up with. If I knew then what I knew now, I might have asked him more questions about the nature of law, about Bastiat, about the Privy Council and the Supreme Court, but usually I just let him talk. The minutiae of interpretation of words, the multiple meanings of a comma, the cloistered hermeneutics of some throwaway phrase from some venerated judge. I was struck by his deep sense of righteousness that constantly butted up against the sheer banality of law, but at the same time sensed that he knew it was all a kind of game, where the object is not the live capture of some truth in the wild, but the settlement of a logical argument that is fully contained within and limited by the fence of law itself, like a safari hunt. There was a certain pleasure in proffering an argument that won the debate, of a monologue that was well delivered and moved people with its sophistry. The court's law was an intellectual exercise, a mind game that barely acknowledged real life. In a way, I wondered if the court's breed of law was really a counterparty to true philosophy. One asks questions to win a case, the other asks questions to find the truth. Philosophy begins its journey with first principles, and to be fair, usually does not get much further than that, whereas the court's law is based on the shelf of books of common law judgments, the empty decrees of the state, and the presentation and decoration of words instead of truth. The court's law is unable to reference higher justification. It cannot make calls to reason. It can only reference itself to draw out some kind of argument, to win the case, to win the game of law. Doug Ewan died the other month. He was 57. I found out from someone who still works at that old office on Featherston Street. I had long since moved out of that place, out of that country. The last time I had been back in New Zealand, I had actually gone up to Doug's small office to say hello, but I guess by then he was already in the hospice. They had appointed him to King's Counsel in his last days in recognition of his work. That last time I peeked through the door, his well-worn leather chair was pushed out from his desk, piled with mountains of papers, as if he had just popped down to Avida for a midday glass of Otago Merlot and to consider the deep implications of a particular word in a particular case that he was poring over. He was a principled man. Thank you for listening. I am Cody Ellingham, and that was The Transformation of Value. The music for this episode was provided by my good friend Simon James French. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can send an email to hello@thetransformationofvalue.com and I will get back to you.